Welcome to Hawaii EV's continuing monthly series of webinars designed to inform, engage. My name is Bill Bugbee, Hawaii EV board member. With me today are my fellow board members, Nanette Denton and Noel Morin, along with our panelists. We have an exciting program for you today and some very good news to report. For those of you who are new to Hawaii EV, we are a grassroots organization, nonprofit, and all volunteer, and we are statewide in our representation of EV entrants here in Hawaii. Simply put, our mission is to accelerate Hawaii's transition and adoption of clean and sustainable transportation. Today's program is focused on that very important issue and how we get to widespread EV adoption, the states and addressing the state's inadequate public charging infrastructure. But first to the good news, I'm pleased to share with you a major political achievement that promises to pave the way for the state's transition to a clean and sustainable transportation. After substantial legislative effort between the public and the legislature, 3 groundbreaking EV bills were signed into law this week by Governor Ige. All 3 bills are designed to advance and enable the adoption and use of zero-emission vehicles in the state. The measures were signed into law as a part of the state's ongoing goal of achieving 100% clean and self-sufficient energy economy by 2045. Currently, nearly 30% of the state's imported fuels are allocated to transportation, and that's fossil fuels. 2021 EV-related bills that were just signed into law include House Bill 552, requiring state-owned vehicles to be swapped out for electric vehicles by the end of 2035. House Bill 424, requiring all state agencies to rent electric or hybrid vehicles when conducting official business. And this creates, of course, a very important business case for rental car companies in Hawaii to transition to EVs. But perhaps the most significant piece of legislative achievement in this session was House Bill 1142, which will allocate 3% of the state's current oil barrel tax revenue to finance the construction of a statewide EV charging network. None of this would be possible without the legislative leadership of Representative Nicole Lowen, who chairs the Environmental and Energy Committee. Nicole summed things up this way about the bills: reduce our contribution to emissions that cause climate change, reduces local pollution, saves taxpayer dollars, reduces reliance on imported fuels, and leaves more dollars circulating in our economy. Sounds like a win-win for all of us. And more specifically on the barrel tax, she added, by providing ongoing and substantial funding to incentivize the build-out of an EV infrastructure, we are making EVs a viable option for more people, especially for renters, condo dwellers, and low and middle income families. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nanette, who will be our primary moderator for the rest of the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And that's really exciting news that those bills were passed this session. It's really great progress for the EV industry as a whole. Just a few housekeeping things. If you're not speaking, we kindly ask you to mute yourself. And then towards the end, we'll have time for questions when you can unmute yourself and ask your questions. Hi, everyone. I'm Nanette Benton, and I'm the Secretary Treasurer of Hawaii EV, and I'm also the President of the Tesla Hawaii Club. As Bill mentioned, public charging plays a really important role in the electrification of transportation. And while many EV owners charge at home, there are many existing and would-be owners that rely on public charging. Today, we're fortunate enough to have a panel of speakers who are all leaders in companies that play an important role in addressing this challenge. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them now. There we go. First, we'll hear from Aki Marceau. Aki is the Director of Electrification of Transportation at Hawaiian Electric. She oversees the strategy, design, and deployment of the company's electrification of transportation solutions across the state. Prior to joining Hawaiian Electric, she served in policy and planning roles at Elemental Accelerator, Hart, and Parsons Brinckerhoff, Brinkerhoff, now at WSP. Welcome, Aki. Next, we have Shawn Moorhead. Shawn is the Vice President of Market and Business Development at EverCharge Hawaii. He has over 10 years experience in the renewable energy sector and previously served as a Global Partnerships Manager at Elemental Accelerator. Welcome, Shawn. Next, we have Karen Su. Karen is the Director of Business Development for Utilities at enelX. She has over a decade of software experience and expertise in utility enterprise solutions and leads the utility and municipal government business development at enelX. Last but not least, we have Beth Tokioka. Beth is the communications manager for the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, KIUC. She previously spent 20 years working for the county in various communications and economic development roles, and was a community outreach manager for Syngenta Hawaii. Welcome, Beth. We want to thank you all for taking time out of your weekends to be here today. The three topics that we're going to be discussing are the latest developments in the area of EV charging, strategies that owners can do to encourage the installation of charging stations in their community workspaces and condos, and finally, the obstacles to the expansion of charging infrastructure and what can be done to address them. I'm going to ask our panelists to take about 10 minutes to share their thoughts on these topics. And for anyone in the audience, if you have questions, please enter them into the chat and we'll address those once the speakers have presented. So let's get started. Aki, let's start with you.
Thanks, Nanette. I'm going to share my screen if possible, but it's very nice to meet everyone. I think there's a lot of new faces for me here, so that means I'm a new face to you. My name is Aki Marceau, and I'm the Director of Electrification of Transportation at Hawaiian Electric. And if you've never seen me before, that's probably because I started right at the very beginning of the pandemic last March. So I've been working entirely remotely this whole time. So fun fact. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and thanks for providing those prompts. I know that we have a very esteemed panel today, and so there's a lot of folks who can probably answer these questions better than I can, but I can certainly share the perspective of Hawaiian Electric and how we can support. So Nanette went over these specific questions. But Hawaiian Electric's been working on electrification of transportation for almost 10 years now. And recently, about in the last 5 years, we've really started to accelerate our program. So currently, we offer 3 specific programs: public charging, rates, EV-specific rates, and charging infrastructure. So on the public charging side, to kind of answer the first question, we're currently conducting a public charging pilot, and it's specifically only for fast chargers right now. This is a program that we're applying to expand in the near future. And so, we would certainly love your support if that's something that you're interested in. But we have approval to put DC fast chargers at 25 sites throughout our service territory. So that's everywhere in Hawaii except for Kauai. And we've currently deployed 21, and we're looking for homes for the last 4 sites. And we're kind of very close to nailing down those last 4 sites. And we're very excited to, continue to support this critical backbone of fast charging need throughout our service territory. And then another component of that is that we're also responsible for operating and maintaining these public chargers. So with the term public, they have to be publicly available. So usually we partner with shopping center owners, or we're currently working with the state to find locations on public lands where we can, public parking lots where we can install our chargers. So those are the types of spaces that we're looking at. To kind of answer the second part of the question, the HOA question, I know that's one of those wicked problems in charging infrastructure. So I can share 2 programs that we also offer or are proposing right now to our regulators, the Public Utilities Commission. So we offer specific rates for commercial charging. So that's our bus rate, eBus JMP, And then we have currently under proposal, under review, EVJ and EVP. Those letters probably mean nothing to you, so I'll dive into them a little bit more. We also we don't have a specific residential rate, but we are developing a residential time of use rate, which can be used for EV charging. And then last but not least, we have public charging rates. So EV Maui, EVU, and then EVF, which is available for third party charging. So that would be like if Tesla were to put a charging hub, they could lock onto the EVF rate. So what does all this alphabet soup mean? Essentially, the only thing that I think is most relevant to you is that they're all time of use rates, which means that they're going to be cheaper in the middle of the day when renewable energy is abundant. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that, you know, we're able to power our cars and our trucks and our buses off of the sun and the wind, and really take advantage of the renewable energy that's present. And so time of use will allow us to use market signals to do that. We also aim to, especially in that time of use period, that midday period, we aim to be competitive with the price of gas. Certainly we can't control how the market, you know, sets the rates, but because we set the underlying rate in coordination with the Consumer Advocate and Public Utilities Commission, then we can kind of try and stay competitive and design it in a more creative way that is competitive with the price of gas. Which obviously fluctuates as well. And then last but not least, we recognize, especially on the commercial side, you know, that darn demand charge. If we end up, I think the goal is really to have fleets of electric vehicles. And if we end up going in that direction, we don't want to, you know, trigger a really expensive demand charge for those who are charging all of their vehicles. And so we've designed the rates to include a component where we can really have a low or no demand charge. And then this is a program that I'm also very excited about. It's called Make Ready Infrastructure. And so currently, I'm sure Karen and Shawn can attest to this. If you were to install a charger at a certain location, you know, the AOAO or the, you know, property owner or whoever would be in charge of putting in all the infrastructure, which can get quite expensive over time. And so we recently got approval for a pilot from the Public Utilities Commission to put in the infrastructure, you know, from the transformer through the meter, and then even on the customer side of the meter, which is, you know, the circuit breaker panel, all the conduit and wires going up to the charger itself. So we don't touch the charger, but we can provide the infrastructure for that. Currently, the only what we would call a customer segment, the only entities that can take advantage of it right now are bus operators. But we did propose something for multi-unit dwellings, so condos and apartments, and commercial charging, so fleet owners, that type of thing. And that's currently being reviewed by the Public Utilities Commission. Fingers crossed, we'll get a decision any day now. And once you know, knock on wood, there is an approval, then we'll be able to roll that out over the next, you know, year or so. So very excited about that program, and we hope that that really accelerates the installation of charging. So these are kind of the specs of it. I won't go into all the details of our public charging or our Make Ready program, but to kind of cover that last questions of what are the barriers, we need more chargers. There's an article that recently came out that said that while we do have the highest EVs per capita in the country, or sorry, second highest EVs per capita in the country, we actually have the lowest, so we're number 50 for chargers per EV. So there's a lot of catch up to do, and we really, you know, need to certainly install more charging and make sure that it's designed in a way that makes sense for our communities and is really thoughtful. What we're doing on our end at Hawaiian Electric is we are applying for this expansion for our public charging program. We plan to file by the end of the year, and usually it takes about a year of review and whatnot. We are, deploying on our Make Ready program. And then kind of in combination with the charging expansion, we're actually developing an interactive mapping tool where it's a way to solicit engagement and interest from folks just like you, where you can actually drop a pin where you would like a public charger, and we'll be using that data to really start to design our systems in the future to see where the greatest demand is. So it's not a guarantee that you'll get a charger, but it is it is a way for us to really understand where the needs are. Last but not least, if you want to, stay up to date and learn more, sign up for our newsletter. I can drop that in the chat. And any questions, feel free to shoot an email over to goev@hawaiianelectric.com. Also, if you find that you're encountering any trouble with our chargers themselves, I know some of them we installed, at this point, like even 8 years ago, so they're starting to get kind of old. and so there might be some, we're constantly working to maintain them, but, feel free to send your input as well. Thank you.
I'm on mute. Okay, there we go. Thanks, Aki. Lots of exciting things happening at Hawaiian Electric. So that's going to be great to increase our charging infrastructure here. Next, we have Shawn Moorhead from EverCharge. Shawn?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here today and wonderful to see you all. Many new faces and some old friends here. So wonderful to be on the call, and thanks to the Hawaii EV Association for hosting today. Again, as I mentioned here, or as Nanette mentioned, I'm Shawn Moorhead in business development at EverCharge Hawaii. We are both a charging equipment manufacturer and retailer and an ongoing charging system service provider. EverCharge has been in operation for over 10 years. 5 million miles are driven annually, powered by about 10,000 of our charging stations deployed across the U.S. EverCharge Hawaii was launched in January 2019 as a subsidiary of Hawaiian Electric Industries and EverCharge Inc. So the utilities are technically my sister companies. So great to see you on the call, Aki, as well. EverCharge is a little bit different than other charging companies. So before we get into kind of answering some of those questions, I just want to differentiate. We have a technology called Smart Power. So Smart Power optimizes and distributes electricity where it's needed most so that we can put out more EV charging stations on any given site. As Aki started to mention there, one of the biggest challenges with deploying charging stations in Hawaii is that many of the garages or properties or parking environments that are here weren't constructed with EV charging in mind. So there's no electrical capacity available. And if there is any, it may only be able to support 1 or 2 chargers. And that's where EverCharge's Smart Power can come in and actually get more chargers out at that location without having to upgrade expensive electrical infrastructure. Also, we're a single point of contact. So our team manages every aspect of EV charger deployment, from getting quotes and managing rebates to system design and engineering, permitting, installation, soup to nuts. So feel free to contact us anytime for any kind of consultation related to EV charging. Also, one thing that makes us different is we charge 0 property fees. So many charging companies charge an annual fee to the property for hosting charging stations. We don't think that's fair. So our fee for managing the charging system is actually incorporated into the hourly cost of charging. And then, as I mentioned, our system can take advantage of electrical efficiencies, so we have lower installation costs. So typically, we can get you a couple of chargers out in a limited capacity environment without having to spend expensive checks on infrastructure upgrades. Lastly, fully managed solutions. So the whole idea here is that we provide EV charging without any on-site resources needed. So we oversee the charging system on your property. And then lastly, customization. So the EverCharge platform was specifically designed for residential and commercial multi-unit properties. So anywhere like from retail centers to private clubs, hotels to condos and townhomes. But just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, and this is a little bit of what Aki mentioned here, there are 3 essential types of EV charging. Level 1, and we see this a lot in garages, is where an owner might just find an outlet somewhere and connect an extension cord in and plug in their vehicle on the other end. That'll deliver about 5 miles of range per hour. Then skipping that to level 3 fast charging, that was what Aki mentioned as the utility being able to deploy a lot of these. And the reason for that is because they're very expensive from an infrastructure cost and a charging equipment cost. You have to have a lot of electricity to power these charging stations. So in most cases, they're not really economical for residential or commercial environments unless there's some sort of sponsorship program. And then lastly, level 2 charging, and that's kind of the standard for residential and commercial properties. Karen and I both work for organizations that mostly focus on level 2 charging with also some DC fast charging capabilities. You're going to get about 20 to 30 miles per hour of charge. And, the average total cost of the project might be anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 to get you a charging station out there. The cool thing about level 2 is you can also implement a payment method for users of the charging station, which helps generate revenue for the property where they're, hosting the charger. A little bit about electric vehicle adoption, and Aki, you mentioned some of this, but just to put a little bit more meat on the bone here, Hawaii ranks number 2 behind California in terms of the rate of electric vehicle adoption per capita. There are over 13,000 electric vehicles currently registered across the state and growing every year. And then HECO's Electrification of Transportation report indicated and predicted that over 430,000 electric vehicles will be present on Oahu alone by 2045. And then, of course, Hawaii's Department of Transportation fleets of over 300 vehicles are all being converted to electric by 2028. And then if that's not enough evidence for you, you can look kind of on the private market side where major auto manufacturers like GM, Mercedes, Nissan, Hyundai, Toyota, and Tesla are all putting out a ton of electric vehicle models. So there'll be more choice for consumers in the future, but also some of the prices of those electric vehicle models will hopefully be driven down to make it more economical in terms of cost of ownership. In terms of Hawaii's state of charge, how do you convince HOAs and non-EV drivers that it's worth it to deploy charging stations? Well, we have some statistics that might help here. For one, it's important to note that 80% of EV charging takes place in the home environment, followed by workplace and retail locations. So most of the time, people are charging where they're parked most, which is at their home environment. And then, of course, at the office or other retail locations. EV charging is increasingly becoming an amenity for these properties that they can offer. There are about 13 electric vehicles for every one public charger in Hawaii. And this is what Aki was starting to mention there. There is a massive demand for charging stations. And as more electric vehicles are on the road, that means we need more chargers out there. So, it's going to be the right combination of both public charging stations, but also residential charging stations and retail and commercial and office space charging stations to really service the need of all those newly electrified fleets and electric vehicles. The good news is if you're in a residential community and you deploy a charging station, even if it's just 2 EV chargers for shared use amongst the entire community, you can raise the resale value of every unit in that community by $3,000 to $5,000. So even if you don't drive an electric vehicle and you live in a residential environment and you want a charger there, multi-unit, and you do benefit by having the chargers in the garage. And if you rent out your unit, you can increase your unit by $50, $75 a month because of that access to the EV charger in the garage. On the commercial side, if you host an EV charger in your parking lot, let's say in a retail complex or a restaurant or office space combined with other commercial, and you can attract new customers, you can charge more rent to tenants, and you can also generate revenue for the property, which is really important. And then lastly, the average daily commute for residents in Hawaii is about 20 miles. So it only takes, 1 hour of level 2 charging to replace that. So, if you're thinking about stopping by Whole Foods for an hour of shopping, you might as well plug in your vehicle. If you're going to the office to take a quick call, you might as well plug in your vehicle. And I think that's how the behavior of EV charging occurs, less so than, running out your entire battery and then filling from 0 to full like we would with an internal combustion engine. So there are different types of public EV charging. There's free public charging, like the EverCharge dual charging station deployed at the Royal Hawaiian Center. So all you have to do there is stop by the security office and they'll give you access to the charger. If you're, attending a restaurant or just going for a walk on the beach, you can still use those charging stations. But it is free and it's also considered public, but there is a little bit of a gate there and they want to, have folks stop by the security station before you start. We also have a dual charging station at the Dole Cannery in Iwalei, and that's a dual charging station, as you can see here. And this charging station is paid. So anyone around the community can stop by there. If you work in a building nearby, you can charge your vehicle, and the property is generating revenue by having these charging stations out, which helps them pay off the upfront investment in putting them out. And then lastly, you can have a paid semi-public charging station like our dual charging station at the Ko'oloaula community in Kapolei. What this station is for is specifically for residents of that community and guests of that community. So, not someone who just happens to be driving by, but, someone who might live there or is visiting someone in that community. So there are a couple different types of models of public charging that I think it's important to mention. How it actually works, though, when you deploy a public charger is that the charger is typically fed by property-owned or common area electricity. Charging is either free or paid for users. If there's paid charging, the EverCharge platform would come in and collect all of those user payments and then reimburse the property for electricity cost. We have a slew of service offerings and customization offerings depending on how you want the system to operate and what's best for that community. Another question we get a lot is what exactly are we paying for when we plug in our vehicle? And typically, you're paying for two things. You're paying for the electricity cost, which in Hawaii can be anywhere from 20 cents to 30 cents a kilowatt hour, which comes out to about $1 to $1.75 for 1 hour of EV charging. And then sometimes properties choose to incorporate a usage fee into that hourly cost that users will pay. And that gets reimbursed back to the property to help them, again, pay off the infrastructure investment and also generate revenue. Another interesting model that we've seen in public charging is subscription basis. So let's say you're a hotel or commercial retail center with a lot of folks nearby in housing environments that might want to charge their vehicle. You can actually have them pay you, $50 a month, and then you give them access to the EV charger that's in your garage. Of course, EverCharge can help you set that up. There's also a question of how to get HOAs on board with EV charging. That's something that EverCharge does as well in terms of HOA engagement and kind of proving out the value proposition. So if any of those are of interest to folks, please do contact me and we can continue the conversation. Lastly, I think this is a barrier to EV charging. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of locations just don't have enough electrical capacity to support EV chargers. So they recognize that and they want to kind of get ahead of that curve. So what they do is they deploy what we call EV ready infrastructure. And in this example, they put out a 100 amp 208 or 240 volt panel. And then with EverCharge's technology and our power optimization software, that can support over 10 charging stations. So that's an infrastructure upgrade that will allow the property to put out 2 charging systems today, maybe 2, 4, or 6 in the next 5 years as EV charging grows. I think don't try to solve a problem that you don't have. If you've only got, 5 electric vehicle drivers in your residential community, just put out 2 charging stations and watch electric vehicle adoption grow, then scale the system. Or if you're in a commercial environment and you just see a few EVs coming in and out every day, start with a couple of charging stations and then scale up. But I think you should think about deploying a larger EV charging infrastructure up front so that you can take advantage of some cost efficiencies and some future proofing there. Lastly, we mentioned, Noel mentioned at the beginning a couple of policies that are coming out to support EV charging, but on the other side of that, there are also some rebates and incentives. House Bill 1142 was just signed by Governor Ige, which does designate more funding to Hawaii Energy's electric vehicle charging station rebate program. The previous program gave $4,500 for a rebate when you just deploy a new dual charging station, or $3,000 when you replace your existing inoperable charging station with a dual charging station. So, EverCharge can help you navigate the rebate process. And then, of course, there are also tax incentives as well. So there's federal tax credit. Just give it a Google, Form 8911, and then you'll kind of dive into that essentially. But it's up to $30,000 for commercial properties, or 30% of the total project cost. I think it's also important to mention just a little bit about the City and County Bill 25. So if you're a developer or you're looking at creating new parking environments, all newly constructed homes or newly constructed parking lots must have 25% of the stalls wired for electric vehicle chargers. That's the infrastructure we discussed. Or there must be charging stations deployed in order to meet City and County Bill mandates. And then, of course, there were other policies that just went into place to support EV chargers. So all this to say, we need a lot of charging station deployments out there, and EverCharge is here to help across the state to get those out there. So if anyone has questions or wants to continue the conversation, please let me know. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Shawn. It's exciting to hear all that great information that you shared, especially for our multifamily, our condo and apartment dwellers. With the Tesla Hawaii Club, we were founded back in 2013, and we've been trying for years and years and years to get more EV chargers into those buildings that don't have them, so we can bring more EV to the state. Okay, Absolutely. Next we have Karen Sue from enelX. Karen?
Hello, everyone. Let me try to share my screen. Hopefully everything works. Are you guys able to see the slide presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Sue. I work for enelX, basically leading the e-mobility efforts out here in North America. Enel, by default, we're known as a utility by DNA. We're the #1 renewable operators, known to...
We're keeping one of the trucks. You decide which one.
Oh, somebody talking? Oh, sorry. We have about 195,000 charging ports deployed. So just to give you some analytics to do a comparison, here in North America, I think in the US, we have only 125,000 charging ports deployed all across the states. So we are very experienced in terms of deploying charging ports around the globe, and then also managing that with some of the renewable efforts. So as Aki mentioned, we're a strong believer, especially out in Hawaii with the microgrid system that you guys have as an island, that renewable is going to be a key point in terms of the electrification efforts, being able to leverage the wind generation overnight with residential charging and the solar generation that's available with workplace charging and public charging. And then that keeps prices down, and it does make things a little bit scalable and helps with the decarbonization efforts. One of the main reasons why people switch over to the EVs really is, carbon emission goals and stuff like that. So we really have to take advantage of that clean energy that's available on the grid to make that happen. Enel services 3 parts and a cohesive solution, very similar to what Shawn had mentioned at EverCharge. So we do offer everything turnkey as a bundle, but in addition, we do also offer it as an a la carte option. So let's say, if you want an enelX charger, we have OCPP compliant chargers that can go onto other network software. Or if you want, maybe an EverCharge charger and they have OCPP compliancy, we can always bring it into our software system. And then on top of that, we provide the services component. So everything from installation to operating and maintenance, client services, and marketing services in conjunction to everything. So we really want to build out that turnkey experience. But if there was an option that you have already selected and really love the solution, everything for us is also offered as an a la carte. Essentially, this is the product line that you're seeing here. So we are a reseller of the level 3 chargers. So we have a 125, a 50, and a 175. You'll probably see some of these with other logos. So these are essentially the BTC and Tritium units that we're reselling on the level 3 side. And then on the level 2 side, we do manufacture our own chargers. So the way that we're thinking of why people are adopting EV chargers, or what is going to help, HOAs and workplace environments really want to install that charger is, one, Shawn mentioned, it does create new revenue streams that would be available. So putting in these chargers, being able to resell some of the energy costs would be able to cover some of the investment models that would be that most property owners are thinking about, meeting state and local regulations. So Hawaii does have objectives to have certain parking lots meet a 10% requirement to have EVs deployed in the area. So really, being one of the pioneers of adoption, you will be able to take advantage of a lot of the incentive monies that might be available within the state. And then employee and customer retention, right? So I think Shawn mentioned this really well. Basically, if you have EV chargers at the property, you do see more people coming into the property with EV, because they have to have that place to be able to charge. And 80% of the charging either occurs at the workplace level or at the private setting home level. So people do treat these more like household appliances or similar to your cell phone. So most people will only need about a 2-hour charge to top off their vehicle. So wherever they're charging, it's really minimal time and flexible in the sense that, we are able to take advantage of when charging should occur and where charging should occur. And then last but not least, a lot of property owners or enterprise companies are having huge sustainability goals that they're trying to accomplish. So by converting to EVs and putting in chargers, that's the most effective way that we see to be able to meet those sustainability goals from larger corporations like IKEA, Costco. I think the turnkey experience that Shawn mentioned is really a driver of adoption. So if there are incentives that are available, I think some of the property owners are really looking for a company to be able to help provide that end-to-end service component. So that's what we're doing here for public charging, right? So being able to engineer and design based off of what the site host would like to put in for infrastructure, look at any rebate eligibility or incentives that might be available. And then because, we are a $1 billion generating company, we do offer finance models as under us to help some of that objective for specific sites that are looking to do that conversion. So all of that is done in-house. So you would work directly with the site, understand, what their objectives are in putting the EV chargers, and then really working into a program or plan in order to support the immediate needs of that specific building manager or enterprise company or HOA, and then really helping them understand the growth potential in the area and then putting in suggestions to help mitigate that process for them. For the level 2 charging, this is what we really recommend for a lot of the longer park dwell time areas, so workplace environment or public shopping plazas, and then also the multi-unit dwelling. We highly recommend the level 2s because one, it doesn't increase a spike on the grid like the level 3 or DC products that are available. And then, as I mentioned, this is sufficient enough for most EV drivers that are just topping off their vehicles, right? So if they're not really going to a destination, I think most people are charging on their level 2 chargers. And then the cost of infrastructure here for installation and also maintenance is a lot lower. So we offer a 32 amp, a 40 amp, a 48 amp, and then an 80 amp that's going through UL. So the 80 amp is targeted for sites that would be looking for supporting those medium-sized and heavy-duty vehicles that have a longer dwell time or park time in the area. And then it's flexible in the sense that we do have products so that it's more forward thinking and then preventing people to have to strip and replace any of the requirements. So if they do want a larger capacity, we do have something that can throttle down at the current state of where EVs are, and then they can go ahead and ramp up the amperage or charging as more of these larger battery capacity vehicles that are coming online. So, and now what have we been doing recently in the public charging space? So we built out the first Pan-America corridor charging recently. So basically everything from Panama all the way up to Baja California, we've been supporting that growth on the electrification side, put in about 220 chargers along the western region of South America, coming up all the way to Baja California and getting into the US. We do see a lot of uptake in terms of those areas as we're putting in infrastructure for charging that people are more comfortable of converting into EVs without that destination or range anxiety. And then it also supports, people within the US that are driving down that corridor for vacation purposes and driving the EV corridor. So we have a lot of experience, and we do service as a utility out in the Chile area. So that was really why we have objectively started in the South America region, putting in products to grow that electrification efforts all across Pan America. As Aki and Shawn had mentioned also, I think the incentives are really the driver of why people are putting in chargers, right? Charging does, as I mentioned, even if you put a level 3 charger, it still takes about 40 minutes. And then on a level 2 charger, it probably takes about 2 hours for average EV drivers to be able to get back on the road. So the likelihood of people putting these at the sideway of street side or curbside, and then, just rest stops, it's really not the best scenario that we can think of when we're putting in these chargers. So the preference mostly is, shopping plazas with longer dwell time for public charging, stadiums or concert venues. And then with that said, a lot of these larger enterprise, stadiums and things like that are thinking about renewables on site. So we would be able to use these large batteries on wheels to help coincide when charging should happen to make them a little bit more effective. And then on the public charging side, as I mentioned, when people are putting in their DC fast chargers, it still takes about 20 to 40 minutes for charging to happen. So we do target places where people would be able to, use the restroom or grab a bite to eat to put in some of these DC fast chargers so that they're just not sitting in their car. So essentially, We do leverage some of the local businesses like Taco Bell or Subway, where they're looking for people to come into the building to spend some money, and then also putting in these chargers so that it economically pencils out for these sites to be able to put in their chargers. And finally, I think I wanted to just point out, I think incentives are really important in the supporting of HOAs making a decision for putting in EVs. So we do see that, as Hawaiian Electric is thinking about putting in the Make Ready program to extend out to the MUDs, in order for us to put in enough chargers or for multi-unit dwellings to really make that jump and decision to be able to put in chargers, we have to get ahead of the game, right? So properties that are coming online or being built right now, those are the lowest cost coverage that we can think of, because it's a lot easier for us to put in chargers as they're building and planning right now versus retrofitting chargers with existing building capacity issues and also building management issues. And so as we're thinking about growing into the MUD space, we really need to consider incentivizing those new development property owners to think about putting in their EVs and putting in the infrastructure to be able to support the growth of the electrification parts on the island. That's it.
Thank you, Karen. It's really interesting to me to see, the case studies from not just on the mainland, but from around the world, and how you can use, that experience and bring that into the Hawaii market to increase our charging infrastructure here. So thank you. Okay, so last but not least, we have Beth Tokioka from KIUC. Beth?
Aloha. Good morning, everybody. Aloha from Kauai, where we are coming to you powered by 100% renewable energy this morning. It's a very sunny day and beautiful day. So very happy to be with you. A few updates on what's happening on Kauai. We were very pleased earlier this year to receive the designation of an alternative fuels corridor by the federal government. This was an effort that was led by our Hawaii State Energy Office to get us this designation, which already exists on all of the other islands. But what it does is it allows us access to federal funds for charging infrastructure, which will be very, very helpful to us down the road. At KIUC, we are currently constructing a new service center for our east side operations in the town of Anahola. And it's currently under construction, will be very important for our operations. But what we did, once we started down the road of the alternative fuels corridor, we amended our building plans there to allow for a make-ready for an EV charging, an EV charger, a public EV charger at that facility. So while it's not included in the current construction plans down the road, we hope to gain access to funds so that we'll be able to put up a public charger near the Anahola Service Center. Also, on the county of Kauai received a technical assistance grant from the federal government earlier this year. It's called the Federal Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project, or ETIP. This is going to be very valuable to our island, and KIUC is collaborating with the county. One of the deliverables is to create a transportation plan and a plan for charging infrastructure throughout the island where it would be best placed. So we're really interested in that partnership and what will come out of that as hopefully a strategic plan. Regarding House Bill 1142, which we've heard a lot about in terms of it creating a sustainable funding source for charging infrastructure, one of the things that Shawn touched on but really hasn't been discussed much publicly about this bill is the enabling the enforcement of HRS 291-71, which has been on the books for a while and requires large public parking lots to have EV infrastructure, but it hasn't been enforced. And it's really, really important that we get that done. I wanted to share, I just have one image here to share with you. Hopefully you can see this. This is from the Kauai EV website. And you can see currently where EV charging stations are located on the island of Kauai. And, on paper, we have a pretty robust network already. However, we do know that not all of these are operational. So, but this does not include those parking lots that are not in compliance with HRS 291-71. So it's really important that we are all encouraging our county governments, because the enforcement is going to trickle down to them. And I feel for our county governments, having worked in county government for many years, it is an unfunded mandate, but they are now charged with creating ordinances that will enforce and make sure that chargers that have not already been installed in these lots do get installed and that they are maintained. So it's really important that we start talking to our county councils, county administrations, to have movement on that bill and that enabling ordinance. And I think that, for us on Kauai, once we fill this map out with those locations that really should have chargers already and don't, that will play into this ETIP planning process to see where the PUPAs remain and where we should have additional charging. So again, I think one thing we can all do is get into that discussion with our county governments to be able to get that law enforced. Also, I just wanted to touch upon a couple of additional things. For utilities, we have unique responsibilities in this arena, and I think that things that only we can do. One is that we are going to have to get to 100% renewable as soon as we can, because we don't want our electric vehicles to be charged with fossil fuel generated electricity. So it's really, really important that we stay focused on that. On Kauai, in last year, we hit 67% renewable. In the next 5 years, we anticipate we might get to 90%. So we're really excited about that progress, and it's very important for us. Also, we want to be smart about this, and I think Karen touched upon level 3 chargers. We want to make sure that as we move forward, we're not forcing our utilities to have to invest money in lots of additional generation to accommodate the charging load that will be coming. So we have to be smart about it, and I think utilities have to be focused on how we can influence charging behaviors, either through time of use rates. One of the things we're talking about at KIUC is potentially incentives for battery charging for homeowners, so that you're charging your battery during the day, and we have lots of renewable, but then charging your car via your battery. So, there are a lot of things as utilities that we have to stay focused on as we move forward. And then finally, education. I've been very happy to collaborate with Drive Electric Hawaii. I don't think that's been mentioned yet today, but Drive Electric Hawaii is a coalition of utilities and other stakeholders around the state. We're currently going through a revamp of our strategic plan and strategic direction. And I think education is so important, because we have to start pulling the demand from our dealerships. I think our dealerships more and more will start pushing electric vehicles, but a car salesman, as you can imagine, is going to try to make a sale. So until we have people going in asking for the alternative of an electric vehicle versus waiting for a car salesman to offer that, I think we're behind the game. So education is so important. Blue Planet has been doing great work in this space, Ulupono, in really creating awareness among folks beyond this conversation who aren't really thinking or understanding, why EV is a great alternative, and actually having them go in and creating the demand and asking to look at EVs when they're making that buying decision. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beth. And it's really impressive to see how Kauai, how far Kauai has progressed with the renewable energy, and it's great to see that you're also looking at increasing that EV infrastructure. You did mention that Drive Electric Hawaii, they do have a program where they train the car salesmen to be EV specialists. So you can go to their site, and you can actually, if you're interested in an EV, if you don't have one already, you can go to their site, and then you can find one of those EV experts that can help you with buying an EV. Okay, well, thank you very much to all our panelists, Beth, Aki, Shawn, and Karen. I think now we're going to do some questions, but actually before we do questions, I think Jim from Aloha Charge is in the audience today. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or comments on our topics today.
Well, we don't have another hour, I don't think, but I did want to say that I've been really happy to see some of the actions that HECO's been taking recently. The Make Ready program is a game changer. The new, well, not so new, DC fast charging rates without demand charges really does make owning and operating a DC fast charger something that's feasible, as opposed to something that's not feasible when you have a demand charge rate in place. So lots of kudos to HECO. And we actually use them as an example when we're talking to other utilities nationwide about some good examples of what to do. The multifamily quagmire is really the biggest challenge that we see. So that Make Ready is going to make a huge difference, because that's really the piece that the AOAOs usually come back and say, we just can't afford to upgrade our system. And even with power sharing, like what EverCharge offers and what ChargePoint offers, still we sometimes struggle to meet the demand with what's in the panel right today. So some great progress coming up. I think the next couple of years are going to be extremely exciting, and the Hawaii is really pointing in the right direction.
I totally agree with that. Thank you, Jim. Now, it looks like we have a bunch of questions in chat, and we've got about 9-10 minutes to answer those questions. Noel, did you want to point out, start asking some of those questions?
Yeah, sure. And as I mentioned in the chat, for those questions that we're not able to address, we'll get the answers and we'll publish them on the website. Additionally, there were a number of comments around, the reliability of the fast chargers and, topics related to the DC fast chargers on the Big Island. And Aki, we have the opportunity separately to, address that. We could put a public statement out as well. So what I'll do here is I'll focus on some of the questions that have come up. Beth, while this topic's still fresh, there was one here for you. I'll just read the question. Is KIUC considering lowering the demand charges for EVs? As I understand, turning on a 100 kilowatt DC fast charger for 15 minutes costs $1,400 a month. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. KIUC, the last time we were before the Public Utilities Commission for a rate case was 2009. So we are absolutely going to anticipate going to the PUC for a number of issues related to rates in the next 2 years or so. And I would be shocked if we didn't have some response to EVs to incentivize charging behaviors and such. So I'm certain that some EV issues will be addressed during that rate case. So stay tuned for that in the next year or so.
Karen, can I ask an add-on question, if I may interrupt real quick? Would you be open to having storage attached to a DC fast charge project in order to offset some of the demand charges?
I think definitely we want to be considering all of those alternatives. I don't think there's much we can do unilaterally right now without going to the PUC for some amendments. And so because there are many, many issues we have to address, including losses due to COVID-19, that those will probably all be wrapped up when we do go to the PUC. And again, I think that'll be within the next year or so that we'll be starting that discussion. So good, very good suggestions, and we want to hear those as we contemplate how to move forward.
Thanks.
The next question came in ahead of the actual event, and it also relates to affordability, which is very critical when we talk about expanding the adoption of EVs across the population. Right, when we start talking about low income consumers, they're going to be very price sensitive. So the question is, how do we address affordability concerns? And I will say perceived as well as actual when it comes to charging. What are some of the strategies that we might employ to address that? Because it's not just about having all these chargers; it's also being able to ensure that it's affordable. And that's for anyone who on our panel, including Jim, who would like to address that.
Well, I can jump in there as well. From a cost perspective, there's always ways to make the charging system work for the property. You can incorporate some sort of revenue generation scheme into the usage of the chargers, which does help, buy down the cost, pay you back to the infrastructure, and then generate revenue. I think the state has done a really good job, especially with HB 1142 and refunding the rebate program to, again, reduce the cost of deploying the upfront infrastructure for charging stations. And then lastly, I think you have to look at it kind of as an amenity, whether you're residential or commercial property. You're adding something that brings value to your community, brings value to your customers, to your guests, or to your residents. And, there is a corresponding infrastructure cost associated with that, but it does pay off in terms of increased rent value, increased resale value, or increased customer traction one way or the other. So, yes, I think technology will develop and costs will come down both for electric vehicles and chargers in the future. But I think so far there's a couple of rebate programs and other ways that we can set the system up to help reduce those overall costs.
Yeah, to support what Shawn just said, 1142 is going to be a real help in terms of making this affordable for a lot of communities that couldn't afford it previously. One thing I just want to add from a very generic standpoint is that equity is a huge topic that is being discussed right now across the entire industry in the United States. And how do we make sure that neighborhoods that are on the lower end of the economic spectrum don't get left behind? Is that curbside charging? Is that making sure there's DC fast chargers at convenience stores in those neighborhoods? These subjects are things that are getting a lot of attention right now. And I imagine that it'll be part of the discussion in the next couple of years here as well.
Thank you. Another question relates to usability. And for those who are EV owners and early adopters, it's probably not that big of an issue, but for someone who's new coming into this realm where there's so many different variations in terms of how to pay for charging, how to access a charger, and maybe even the need for multiple adapters, to be able to utilize the charging station. What can be done, or maybe what is being done to help standardize the actual charging experiences?
Sure. The standard plug there for an EV charger, I believe it's a J7112, or maybe I got those numbers wrong, but that is an industry standard. Almost all electric vehicles use that standard charging cord. If you have a Tesla, it typically comes with an adapter that snaps on the end of that charging cord to enable that charging event to take place. So I think from a governmental level and a policy framework level, having that standard size plug, regardless of vehicle, regardless of charger, so there's complete compatibility is a huge help. And that's currently the standard. Going forward, I think some electric vehicle companies will want to have their unique charging plug so that they can also sell you a unique charging EV charger. But I think as far as government stepping in and making sure that that is a compatible experience for every electric vehicle, that is a critical need. But also, thankfully, currently that is the standard.
I have one thing to add. I think on the J1772, the level 2 side's pretty standardized. The DC side still has some variability. So the CHAdeMO and the CCS. Most vendors are going to CCS just because it has the larger capacity draw that can be accepted. But Tesla is still on a CHAdeMO adapter right now. So I think that's the problem with, public charging at this point. We do want to kind of point the direction that if everybody can go to the CCS type of environment, I think is more agnostic, especially out here in the US. In the European market, I think they're pretty disparate. And so that's why in the global format for automakers, they are able to still, basically privatize the specific units of charging equipment or cable that they want to use. And what they do on the European space is basically you carry your own cable based on the vehicle that you buy. But it's really not going to work out here in the US. So I think government does need to step in, especially for public charging on the DC side, to standardize something that everybody would be able to use.
Well said, Karen.
As a Tesla driver, I know that Tesla has their CCS to Tesla port adapter in Europe and has for a couple of years. They keep saying they're going to bring it to the United States, but we haven't seen it yet. We also are seeing things like Rivian coming out where they're going to have some unique access to their own DC or their own plugs. The way they're doing it is through communication, though, not through an actual physically different plug. In terms of the different networks talking to each other, there is a lot of work going on right now so that a Greenlots card holder can charge at a charge point station or an enelX station or vice versa. We're seeing the development of the EV charging network, much like we did with ATMs long ago, where you had to go find a Cirrus machine or a Plus machine. And now today you can just go to any machine and get cash. You might have a little bit of a roaming fee, but that is an active initiative by all the big companies out there right now.
Great. Well, looks like we are right up on 11 o'clock. This was a really, really informative session, a lot of information covered. And we want to thank our panelists and Jim for jumping in as well, for providing all of this information. This session was recorded, so we will be posting that on our website at hawaiiev.org. And also for the questions that we didn't answer, the Q&A, we'll do our best to go back and get those questions answered from our panelists, and we'll also post that on our website as well. So again, I want to thank everybody, especially our panelists, for taking time out of their busy weekends to join us and share all of these insights today. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you really got a lot of information out of this, and it's really exciting to see there's so many resources for us to build up that EV infrastructure out there for all those EVs that are actually, people are buying now. Our next Talk Story session is going to be July 31st. So if you want to just check our website, and we'll have more information on that as it gets closer. But again, thank you again for our panelists, and thanks everyone for joining, and everybody have a safe weekend. Aloha.
Aloha, everyone.
Thank you.